Okay, so we're gonna kind of get into this. The book covered installing packages using the command prompt, which, depending on the version of Windows on your machine, I know at least one person told me they bought a new machine this at the beginning of this course. So yours is probably the latest version of Windows 10, so you may not have easy access to the command prompt, or depending on the update. That's part of the reason I went ahead and covered PowerShell stuff. So let's kind of walk through this setup because there's some setup points here that you'll need to do with a lot of programming languages in Windows machines. You may even need to do this for command prompt. So setting it up to work with PowerShell or command prompt are environment variables. That's basically the variables stored in Windows that tell it where to look for, say, a programming language. Setting that up is kind of the same no matter which language we're working on. So let's go through that. For example, let's get into the examples. I started this little file here, just as hello world, prints out. I put it in my delete folder if I open that up real quick. You can see that did this say hi when I just wrote it in Notepad++ instead of idle. It seemed quicker at the time because I think Notepad++ was already open. But just prints hello world and waits for an input to enter or to end and push enter and kind of goes through that. So we saw that, but what if we wanted to run that from PowerShell directly? Or the command prompt? You may have similar issues there, and the setup for if you're having this problem in command prompt would be exactly the same. So let's see, I'll change the working directory. Set location changes the directory we're in. Have them set it to C/users, Chris profile, documents folder, delete folder, which is where that file I just showed you was located. And well, we saw the start method, right? I could say run start, say hi. That's just what I called it. Whoops, say hi.py. And it doesn't quite know what to do with it. Whoops, I don't know why I spelled it that way. Start say hi.py. Did that completely backwards. Sorry about that. But it opens Python interpreter, the default one, kind of like we saw. What about running it right here in this? There's a command, I uninstalled it to go through these steps, so this isn't going to work right this moment. But I can ask for that same file, and that would run in the PowerShell window, but it didn't do anything. So I'm going to kind of go through the setup for doing that. I'm going to leave this open for a second while we go through those other setups. Okay, so that one in particular, I deleted in order to do this little video here. So right now my command prompt won't know what Python is either. So you might be having that problem in either PowerShell or command prompt that Windows doesn't seem to know what Python is. And this is something that may happen with every programming language. It usually, typically, most often should install automatically, but it might not. So you may have to come through and do this manually from time to time. So I wanted to make sure and do a little video going over the steps. What we have to do is set an environment variable that tells Windows where to look for the programming language. So if we come over to Control Panel, start the Control Panel, then under System and Security, then System, I have this option over here, Advanced System Settings. So we want to go in that. And this little dialog box pops up, hopefully open to the tab already for Advanced. If not, just come over to this tab. Then down here at the bottom, you'll see this button, Environment Variables. So just like we do with variables in our programs, it stores information. In particular, this stores information about where to find things. So you'll see some for the user accounts and some for system variables. So we're going to come down to system, and somewhere on the list of system variables, you should see one called path. If not, then that means your computer doesn't know about any programming languages, so you'll need to create a new one called path. But if it's there, you can just edit it. If we go to edit, you'll see this. So it's kind of like a list. We can store a whole lot of different programming languages to path. So up here I have the Java, you'll see that, which this one's Java 12. So we come down some Windows things, some PowerShell extensions, OpenSSH, Wix. That's Wix toolset that kind of works with most programming languages. It's extra library extensions on that works with most programming languages, not the Wix website thing. It's more internal. Oh, I have a second Java here. Last fall when I was teaching the SDEV 200 class, had a problem with Java 12, so I had to roll back to Java 8 for some things. This one's kind of useful. That allows me to do SQL, MySQL, right from PowerShell. Can do that a lot. PuTTY and just different programming languages. Oops, I thought I deleted this one. Let's delete that off there. So it doesn't know what Python is. Oh yeah, I did the first take and forgot to delete that after the first take on this video. So it doesn't know what Python is. So we have to tell it where to look for the programming language, which I already have opened here. You'll want to look through and find where it is. What I found is the quickest way to find it, if you're not sure, is if we start idle. You've probably seen this and kind of wondered why it did that every time. Go to new file, and when we go to save it, it probably goes to this weird location here. That is the address you want, because that's where the language is located at. So you can just copy from that, cancel out of all that. I just kind of copied that address, or if you go into language here, programs, Python, the version of Python you're using, just copy that and bring that over here, and you can just double click in one of the spots or hit new to add something to it, and then paste that right in. So now, let me go back in there. It knows about the Python 3.7 language. So should be able to do that right from PowerShell. So I'm going to hit OK, OK, OK to go out of that. There's another one we're going to do in a moment. I was just thinking I'll do it twice to kind of go over all the steps. And we need to restart PowerShell, so I'm going to close this and open a new one. And once again, I'm going to change the working directory because right now it's up at the top level. So set location to C, users folder, the Chris profile, documents folder, delete folder. And it changed the directory we're working in. So now it should know about Python. So if I do Python, say hi.py, oh, you see that little Python program ran right in PowerShell here. So instead of running in the idle shell, just set it up to run in PowerShell. And when we go to install stuff, when we want to install new modules in Python, that is something called pip. And it has this thing called install, which if I come over here, not that one, somewhere there was, had it open. There it is. Under in that Python, that file holding all the stuff about the Python language, you'll see a folder called scripts. And pip is the pipeline to install new things. The book goes over that in the command prompt, which is becoming out of date. Windows is trying to phase it out. So some of the more recent versions of Windows 10 and some of the more recent updates to your version of Windows 10 may have cut out some of the ways you can access the command prompt. So the script is here, but if I try to run that, it doesn't know what it is. So let's go through those environment variables again and set up one for this pip install, which is the pipeline, the standard pipeline to install new Python modules into the core library. Okay, so we need to tell PowerShell where pip is, or command prompt. If you're still working in command prompt, the steps are exactly the same. And then this is consistent for any language, not just Python. These steps for setting up an environment variables will be exactly the same no matter which language you're working in. So we'll go back over to control panel. Well, I'll just go all the way through it. Back to that point that repetition is important for learning. So if we just go to the start menu and open control panel for Windows, we'll come into the section for system and security, and then into system. And over here, this last option here, on mine it's last option, you might have different ones on yours, but advanced system settings. Go into advanced system settings, and if you need to, come to the advanced tab, and then go to environment variables. And this is all the stuff that Windows itself knows how to look for. Our programming languages should all be set up under an system environment variable called path. So if we come in here and edit this, Z-Man knows a few: Java, PowerShell, more Java, MySQL, PuTTY, and just a moment ago we installed Python 3.7. The version I'm using, 3.7. So we don't know, it doesn't know where to look for the Python install pipeline though. So we need to add that in there. So in this whole address, users, Chris, app data, local programming, Python, we can go into the Python programming language and then this folder called scripts. And that's where the Python install pipeline is located. So if we copy that address, or if you wanted to, you could type it all in. And then come over here and, well, I double clicked last time, I'll click new. So we need to add a new one, which just goes down to the next spot. And then we can paste that address in. Enter, and so now it knows where to, it'll go in and look for all of those scripts. You'll notice there's also one called easy install. I believe our book covers pip, but that's the one I've always used. The book mentions it. The instructions that the book puts for it, once the environment variables point to it, you can do it either in PowerShell or command prompt. If you're on Windows, if you're on Linux, a slightly different thing, but similar to set those up. But with programming languages, we always have to tell the Windows machine where to look for the language. And it should set up by default when you install the language, but just in case it doesn't, this is where you come to manually set it up. You just come to control panel, find system in the control panel, advanced system settings, and then go to environment variables. And this environment variable called path tells Windows where to look for programming languages. So if we hit OK, kind of go through all those, close out of that. And this was already running, so we need to restart PowerShell. I left that open to express that point. Make sure you restart PowerShell after changing any environment variables. Or command prompt, same thing. It will need restarted if it was already running when you did that. So set location. Well, I could just kind of show this one. If I want to install something, install Pygame. So it's going and finding this, and this is the reason I did this now. It's mentioned in the video lecture on object-oriented programming. What I thought was the most useful thing to really understand objects was when I started doing small games. In particular, one called Game Maker. This has been around for a while. This is great. I would highly recommend trying it. It's a lot of low-code stuff, so you're dragging your mouse around and setting things up that way. But it's object-oriented, and learning to make games in that is really what helped me understand how object-oriented programming goes together. We're doing more examples in Python, so I thought I'd use Pygame, and I'll point you towards a reference on this. But you can see now there's no error messages, so it went ahead and installed this Pygame module into my version of Python. So now I can use Pygame, which beyond the scope of the class, which has been mentioned before. When I say beyond the scope of the class, that means not in the lectures. If that's where your interest lies, yeah, let me know. It's definitely still happy to answer questions and kind of point you in this direction. But I checked just a few minutes ago and found a good starting reference. So all I did was search for Pygame. There's the official ones, some YouTube videos if you like videos. And then somewhere near the top, you should see this realpython.com and this one, a primer on game programming in Python. This is a really good starting point. I was looking for some just a few minutes ago, and that was super easy to find. I will include the link here in the lecture directly. And this has something to kind of help get you started doing small games in Python. Background and setup. One thing to note is, well, there's a $sign here, so you might be familiar that if you see $sign, that's signaling bash. So instead of, we did this in PowerShell, which our prompt looks like that, but the prompt in bash for Linux or a Mac is going to be a $sign. So they're doing it in, their examples are in bash, but it should be, I don't know why that popped up, but it should be very similar. And this will kind of get you going. They have a basic one here, just opens up. And then there's some examples in Pygame as well that you can open up and kind of start messing around with, or make some objects. And putting in a game, it's easier to visualize the object because we can picture each game object as its own real thing. And I found that more helpful than any of the standard textbook examples for learning about object-oriented programming. Game Maker is the one I learned on. If you want to look at that, they've changed. So you have to set up an account with them. I believe you can still use it for free and everything. There's a better version that's paid for, but if you want to look into that, that's one that I would highly recommend to get a good sense of object-oriented programming. And as opposed to, what's the homework assignments this week? The employee class and retail item class, and there's a couple on there, plus our class example. The standard textbook examples, I always fell a little short, but when I tried to put together a game, even a simple game or maybe just an animation if you don't want the whole interactive thing. I found that very, very helpful to get a better sense of what object-oriented programming is, because we can actually picture each one of those game objects as a separate entity, a separate standalone entity with everything encapsulated inside of it. And then obviously the inheritance and polymorphism come in as well, but particularly the encapsulation at the introduction level. So yeah, I'll include this link for doing that. And the main thing there was setting up those environment variables, and that's going to be the same whether you're using PowerShell or command prompt. And command prompt's phasing out, so you might want to look into PowerShell. That's why I've included some videos on that here. But this is a supplement to the, well, this shows up somewhere in the book, only covers command prompt, which you might not have easy access to because Windows is phasing that out. So this is how we would do the same thing in PowerShell. And if your environment variables aren't set up, you might from time to time have to do that in programming languages. I just wanted to go over that explicitly, so this will be in the supplemental videos, and I will add an announcement pointing to it, I guess. Yeah, and just remember the environment variables, it's all the programming languages need to go to a system environment variable named path.